You are good to go whenever.
Do we do anything for audio or just?
We're using the mics on here.
Cool, fair enough.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
All right, well, we can go ahead and we'll just kind of jump right into things and get started since we're a little late getting into the room. This is going to be a session about the Views module, and if you're sitting in the back of the room, I'd recommend that you come to the front of the room or closer to, so I don't have to yell the whole time. That would be awesome. If you really want to stay back there and not hear anything, that's up to you. The presentation is going to be about using the Views module in Drupal. It's a pretty high-level presentation. We're not going to be looking at any code. We're more going to be talking about how the module works and why you might want to make use of it and so forth. First, a little bit about me and who I am, because that's kind of mandatory for these things, right? My name is Joe. I work at Lullabot. Lullabot is a Drupal development strategy training. We do pretty much everything Drupal, and lately we do pretty much everything with the web. We just really like building websites. I've been working with Lullabot for a couple of years. I'm also EOJ the Brave on Twitter and Drupal.org and Xbox Live and pretty much every internet service that ever existed. That's me. I've been working with Drupal for probably about 7 years now, so I've got a lot of experience with it. One of the things that I really like to do is teach other people about Drupal and talk about things like this. So it's pretty fun. At Lullabot, one of my primary tasks, I guess you would say, is I work a lot on the Drupalize.me website. It's a library of training videos. We do things like talk about the Views module and how to use it and implement it on your website and all kinds of other fun stuff. If you're new to Drupal or just kind of looking to ease the learning curve a little bit, I'd highly recommend giving it a look. I have to highly recommend it. That's what I'm paid to do. But on to the meat of the presentation. Before we really get started talking about like what Views is and kind of how it works, I want to take a step back and just sort of talk about how websites work and what makes up a website. So we can kind of understand why this is all important. So if you kind of step back and take like the 10,000-foot view of a website and start thinking about like what are these things made up of, pretty much every website you've ever looked at or worked with is made up of lists of things. That's pretty much it. If you think about it, a newspaper website is a list of news articles. Facebook is a list of status updates. Twitter is a list of status updates. You log into Basecamp and you're doing your project management stuff, you see a list of all the members of your project team and a list of all your tasks and so forth. All of these things are just different lists of content. And that's really like what makes a website. And as an example, I took a screenshot of the Star Tribune website. So I'm from Minneapolis, and the Star Tribune is our local newspaper. And I wanted to do this exercise where I was like, all right, I'm going to look at this web page and decide what pieces of it are not lists, or what pieces of it are lists. And I started going through, and I decided that, well, all of these things on the page are probably lists, though they're kind of different styles of lists. Here we've got a big list of just like headlines of articles. Over here we've got another list that's probably also still articles, but it's formatted a little differently. And even though there's only one of them here, in theory this could be a list as well. It's just a list that contains one thing. And this here is also a list of headlines. And then maybe you can start to get the idea that these two lists are maybe related to one another, and that it's actually a list of three things, but this one is displaying the first item slightly differently. Either way you look at it, it's really all a list. And like seriously, that's a list of the temperatures that are occurring on that day. Everything on this site, for the most part, ends up starting to become either a list of things or navigational elements or advertisements. Okay, so the websites are made up of two things: lists of content and advertisements. So the problem with this is Drupal is really, really good at content, and it's really bad at making lists of things. Drupal out of the box. When you download Drupal 7, you can do all kinds of really cool stuff with the new entity system. You can create users with different fields on them, so you can create all these attributes about a particular user. You can create articles and pages, and you can add new content types. You could add an event content type with dates and all kinds of stuff. And then the only list you can ever see is the list of 10 most recent things on the front page, and a block of latest posts that you can put somewhere on the page. And like, that's it. Out of the box, those are the lists that Drupal gives you of your content, which is kind of a bummer because websites are really just big lists of things. So in Drupal, maybe a better way to sort of think about how all of this works. When you build a Drupal site and you have a bunch of different node types and different types of entities, and you fill out the form and you populate it with a lot of content, what you're doing is you're creating this big pool of content. So let's say our website is like a parking lot and it's full of cars, full of some kind of content. And what we'd like to be able to do is pull just certain pieces of that content out and create lists of it. So not only are we creating lists, but we're doing things like filtering the pool of content and saying, show me only the things that have a certain attribute. I may only want to look at cars based on their hood ornaments, because really that's the only thing that's important to me when looking at cars. Somebody else may only want to look at cars that are of the type truck. So even though there's a whole bunch of different pieces of content on our site, I may only want to show somebody articles. And you might even want to get more complicated. You know, that list becomes eventually things like, I want to filter down the list of thousands of articles on my site to show you just the ones that are pieces of content that are an article, that were published within the last year, that were written by Joe, and are somehow tagged with the free tag of kittens. So, if you want to do this in Drupal, all you have to do is open up your text editor and start writing a module, and write some code that looks something like this. And just keep writing it, and keep writing it, and eventually you'll be able to create a list of things, querying Drupal's database and pulling something out of that big pile of stuff that you've created, and then that's great, right? Blah, blah, blah. I got tired of writing this and gave up. Actually, I wouldn't even try this. It probably doesn't do anything. But it would look something like that. All of this code I can write into a module, and then I run it against the database, and the database gives me a big list of things. Unfortunately, all the database is giving me is a really big array of things, which I could, I guess, like use var dump, and now, sweet, I've got a list on my front page of things that I got from the database. Unfortunately, our users probably want that to actually look like something. So you need to format that list, too, in a way that's useful for people. So you format it as a blog. You format it as a list of headlines. Is it an RSS feed? You could format it as a calendar. So this is where Views comes in Drupal. Views is Drupal's tool for building lists of things. Before Views existed, literally, the way that you would create a new page that listed all of your nodes was to open up your editor, start writing a module, and type a whole bunch of MySQL into the module. And it worked fine, but it was really tedious. And then Views came along and gave us this sweet, pointy, clicky interface to do all of this for us. Views, at its heart, is really a graphical query builder. The tool itself, what it does is, in the background, it's assembling all of that code that we saw on the previous screen to create the list. But we don't have to memorize all this sort of arcane SQL syntax. We just have to remember which button to click on, which checkbox to check. And Views will take care of writing a lot of that code and then executing it for us. And in addition to doing that, Views will also take all of the results that are returned from building that list and give us options to format the list. So we can do things like make a table or you could make a photo gallery. I mean, a photo gallery, right, is really just a list of images, and you're showing a thumbnail of the image, maybe in a grid format, but it's still just a list. So that's sort of where Views comes into the picture. And what I want to do is just kind of talk about, I think the best way to understand how Views works and what you can do with it is to walk through the interface a little bit. I'm going to do this with screenshots, though, because live demos are prone to not working when you're on public Wi-Fi. It's awesome. So once you've downloaded the Views module from Drupal.org and installed it on your site, there's actually two pieces to the Views module. There's views.module and the views_UI module. In order to see this, you need to enable both of them. The Views UI is the piece that gives us a user interface that we can use to do all of the query building. The Views module itself does all the heavy lifting. It builds the query, it makes our lists and outputs it. It'll actually still work even without the UI enabled, but it's pretty hard to build a query without a user interface to build that query. And I'm sure somebody could come up with a way to do it, but I don't really see the point. So turn on both the modules, Views UI and the Views module, and once you've done that, you can navigate to the structure. On the Structure tab, you can navigate to the new Views menu item, and you'll see a page that looks like this, which is actually a view. Pretty crazy. Views is used to build its own interface in some cases. So you see a page like this, and it's, by default, it's populated with a handful of views. I'm going to use the term views and lists, and at this point they're sort of interchangeable in most contexts. But a view is a list of things. The Views module comes with a couple of pre-built lists so that you can get an idea of what's possible with it. And one of the things that I like to recommend if you're your first time using it is actually just explore what the module comes with out of the box to get some ideas. And then you can start building your own. On this administrative page, you'll see a list of all the views on your site. Most likely, once you get further down the road building your site, this will actually have like a few hundred different views in the list, not just the couple of them that Views ships with. Any of them, you can click on the little pill button icon on the right-hand side and choose one of these options. Primarily, you're going to use Edit, and that allows you to edit that view and start to make changes to the query that's being built. Disable, clone, and export we'll touch on briefly just because they're there. This has to do with the fact that the Views module provides a way for, once you have done all of this configuration in your database and you've built a view and you save it, and that's great, you've got this awesome view that people can now come and look at your website, but you've done it all on your local laptop and you need some way to share that with other people. The Views module has a way for you to export all of that configuration into a state that can exist in code so that it makes it really easy to share that view with someone else. And that's what that export button does. Clone and disable are related to that. Disable in the sense that once a view lives in the code, you can't actually delete it. I don't want you to be able to click the delete button on your Drupal website and remove some files. So instead, Views has this concept of disabled. A disabled view, for all intents and purposes, is a deleted view. But you can bring it back later. Yeah.
It's two brief questions. What's the format of the exported file, and is there an import to pull it to your other site?
Yeah, question is, what's the format of the exported file, and is there an import? Views doesn't actually, on its own, create a file of any format. Whoa. Hi. We can do puppet show now. The export, when you click that export link, what you'll actually get is a big text area with an exported, it's basically a PHP object. And you could copy and paste that into a module and save it that way. Or if you just wanted to import it somewhere else, there's a handy import link up there at the top. You can click import, which gives you an empty text area that you can paste that into. Click save. That's sort of the lowest barrier to entry for exporting views. And otherwise, you can take the code and place it into a module, and that's how you would deal with it. Yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to answer them as I go. If you want to create a new view, so I'm ready to start from scratch, I've kind of looked at some of the ones that are already there. I click on the Create New View menu action at the top of the page, and I'm presented with this screen. This is actually a helpful wizard, and the only time you'll ever see this form is when you're creating a new view. So just brand new views, you'll see this form. And what this does is provide me with sort of some of the more common options for creating a list. I'm going to use this to choose to give my list a name. And the view name in this case is more of an administrative thing, so I can find it later on. And then I'm going to do things like say, I'd like to create a list of, and then there's a big drop down, and that drop down is going to contain all the different things that the Views module knows about that I can create a list of. in Drupal core, out of the box, this is going to be all of the different content on my site, all of the different users on my site, all of the different files on my site. I think there's a couple others off the top of my head I honestly don't remember. You can make lists of lots of different things. And so you need to choose sort of where am I going to start pulling stuff? Which bucket am I going to stick my hand into first? So I'm going to stick my hand in the content bucket and see what I can find. And then I get just a couple options here. Like what type of content? Well, Drupal has two out of the box. It has articles and pages. Maybe I've created more. So immediately I can filter this down to just content of a certain type. I can also tell it to create a page. We'll come back to this concept of displays in views, but for now, just let's say when I'm creating a new view, in this case, I'm going to create it as a page. And a page has a URL and a title and the option to make it visible in the menu. I can say how many items do I want to display in the list. If there's more than 10, should I use a pager for the list? A bunch of different options here. I click Save, and I'm taken to a page at this URL that lists all of the things that I just asked it to. Ta-da! And then it gets a little bit trickier. After you've created a view, after the first time you click that link, it's like, hey, I'm all helpful, and I've got this little wizard that you can use to get things done. The next time you go and edit your view, you're presented, you're kind of prevented from figuring it out because you're presented with this sort of cockpit of options that are all over and kind of make no sense initially. They'll make sense once you get into it a little more. This is what that view would look like if I had sort of come and used this form to create the view initially instead of using the wizard. And every time after that, when I edit the view, I'm given this set of options. There's a whole lot more options in views than the wizard makes apparent. And so that's why this is nice. What I'd like to do is just sort of walk through all of these different sort of main areas in this and talk about what each of those control in our view. So the first one that you need to know about is this concept of fields. So in a view, fields here is telling Drupal what I would like to display. So if you think about the analogy of our parking lot that's full of cars, those cars are all made up of all kinds of different parts or different attributes. So I need to tell views which pieces do I want to display. Like what of that car do I actually want in my list? And maybe I don't want to display the entire car. I just want to display tires and hood ornaments and I don't know what else cars have. Exhaust pipes. Well, most cars have exhaust pipes. In the context of Drupal, this would be things like the title of the node, the body of the node, the user that created the node, any extra fields that I've added to my content type using the field UI would be available as options in views as something that I could then display. If you've ever written SQL queries before, this is sort of the portion of your SQL query that comes right after select where you're saying, these are the things that I'd like to select, NID, title, body, and so forth. Luckily, we don't have to write any of that. We just click the add button, and it says, hey, what would you like to select? So that's fields. The filter criteria are what we use in order to filter down the list. So we say, whenever you're building a list of things in Drupal, you start with everything, and you filter it down to a subset to get the list of things that you actually want to display. So if we're looking at content in Drupal, we're saying there's all kinds of content. There's articles, there's pages, there's events, whatever content I've added on the site. I need to filter it down to just what I'd like to display in this particular list. And for SQL, this is sort of the equivalent of our where clause. All of the same information that is available for fields is also available as something that I can filter on. So the type of node, the title of the node, the person that authored the node, when it was created, when it was last updated, whether or not it's published. Drupal knows all of this metadata about each piece of content, and any of that information can be used as a filter here. And I can do things like say, yes, the node is published. So that immediately says, get rid of all the nodes in this pool that are not marked as published. So I've already narrowed it down a little bit. Views is also really smart about dealing with these filter criteria. And it's intelligent in the way that if I select a field that in Drupal is representative of a date, like the date that this item was published, the options that Views will give me in order to filter it understand this numeric data in the database actually represents a date. So I'm going to give somebody tools like the ability to say, show me only things from 6 minutes ago. Show me only things for the last 12 months, that kind of thing. Whereas if it was just an integer field, it would know that as well, and it would adjust the filter to say, instead of using a date here, why don't I say, show me everything that's greater than the number 10? So filters are used in order to determine what we'd like to appear in the list. Next, we've got our sort criteria. This is telling Views the order in which we would like items in the list to be listed. Again, with our sort criteria, we have access to all of the same metadata that we do in the filters and in the fields. But it's context aware. It knows that in this case, you're using it in a order by or sort operation, which is important because you think about, so the easiest example of this is a text field versus a integer field. The way that a database deals with sorting those is different. It sorts an integer in numeric order. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, so forth. A text field, it sorts everything in that text field in alphabetical order. So if you were entering a bunch of numbers into a text field, they wouldn't actually come out in the order that you would expect it to. It would be like 1, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 2, 20, 21. So Views is smart enough to figure that out for us based on knowing that this type of field is representative of a numeric value. Yeah?
Just a quick question on filter criteria. If you have multiple ones, can you control if they're ors or ands?
You can. The question was, can you control with the filter criteria whether this is an or operation or an and? By default, Views treats all of your filters as an and operation. So that would be to say, is this content published? Yes. And is this content type equal to article? So both of these things would have to be true in order for that item to be present in our list. An or operation, which you can do in Views, as long as you're using Views 3, which if you're using Drupal 7 is the only version that works, so you're probably safe. You can do or operations, and an or operation would be like saying, if this content is of the type article or it is of the type page, now both articles and pages can be present in our list. So yeah, totally can do that. That was sort of a big hang-up in Drupal 6 and earlier versions of Views. There wasn't a good way to do ors.
Is
Yeah.
it possible to group them? Like, is there and then like separate groups?
It's yeah, that's exactly what it does. You actually, when you add new sort criteria, you can basically add this or field, and it has a method for grouping them together. Yep, it's pretty much if you can do it in a where clause in SQL, you can do it in Views for the most part. Finally, I wanted to talk about relationships here. So now we start to get into some of the more advanced things that Views can do. If building lists of things wasn't advanced enough for you, just wait. At the beginning, we said we have all these different buckets that you can pull information out of. And we had to pick one to start from. I had to start by saying that I'm going to build a list of pieces of content. But there's lots of other information in Drupal that I might want to use in this list. For example, a piece of content is authored by a particular